Imagine being held captive in a basement, and when police arrive you think you're free. You call out for help, but they leave you there to be killed. In the 1980s, girls in Belgium started vanishing. The local community in Brussels was understandably unsettled. They had no idea a monster was living among them. Marc Dutroux was reportedly abused as a child. When he became an adult, he turned to a life of crime. He was involved in substance dealing and selling stolen cars. He married early and had 2 sons, but he had many affairs and started abusing his wife. They separated and he married his second wife, Michelle Martin. The pair would go on to do the unthinkable. In 1985, the couple had a disturbing hobby. They would kidnap and women. A friend of the couple called Jean also helped them. Marc had managed to convince him that he owed him a favour. On June the 7th, 1985, they took their first victim. This was 11-year-old Sylvie D, who had been walking home. Men jumped out of the car and grabbed her and kidnapped her, and when they got her home, they AR'd her. They took a Polaroid picture of her before setting her free. They took many more victims before eventually being caught by police. The girls that were set free went to police and provided them with information to make the arrest. Marc, Michelle and Jean were imprisoned for a short time. Marc, however, managed to manipulate the prison officials into thinking he was disabled, so he got many benefits. He was also able to state that he couldn't sleep and got prescribed some sleeping tablets, which he would go on to use for a sinister purpose. Marc was released in 1992 after serving just 3 years in prison. This time he learned a lesson: to set no more of his victims free. He built a dungeon in his basement for his next victims. Between 95 and 96, he would kidnap at least 6 children. He kept them in his basement, tortured them and SA'd them, and used the sleeping tablets to sedate them. It was at this point that news was circulating in the area of the missing children. 2 8-year-olds had vanished, and later that year 2 teenagers too. It was clear that this was no coincidence. Shockingly, despite Marc's own mother ringing police and reporting him, it would take 5 months for police to go to his house. Marc's mum even told them he was keeping girls captive. Marc was arrested during this period for stealing a car. He spent 4 months in prison while 2 of his victims remained in the basement. Michelle knew about these girls, and Marc had told her it was her job to feed them and water them while he was in prison. Frustratingly, although police finally searched his house at this point, despite hearing children's voices, the police just left. They said it sounded like the voices were coming from outside. They even found undeveloped camera film, which, had they just developed the film, they would have seen the basement in these images. Marc had documented the process of building the dungeon via the camera. Tragically, due to Michelle stating that she was too frightened to go down into the basement, the girls died of starvation. When Marc was released, more girls started vanishing. This included 12-year-old Sabine Dardine and 14-year-old Letitia Delhy. Marc was finally arrested after an eyewitness recognised his van involved in an abduction. He confessed and showed police his dungeon. He also led police to where he'd buried 2 of his child victims alive. It also transpired that he'd had an accomplice called Bernard Weinstein. After the pair had a disagreement, Marc also buried him alive. There was public outrage at the mishandling of the case. There were protests on the street, and there was even claims of a wider P-ring. The 2 brave survivors, Sabine and Letitia, testified in court against Marc. They recalled being chained to a bed and repeatedly AR'd. Michelle was given 30 years in prison and Marc got life. A poison expert has been accused of killing his wife by poisoning. 30-year-old Connor Bowman from Minnesota was married to his 32-year-old wife Betty. Betty was a pharmacist described by her loved ones as vibrant and outgoing. She loved travelling and lived life to the full. Now, Connor specialised in poison science, and in August his wife was hospitalised. She was showing symptoms resembling that of food poisoning. On the 20th of August, just 4 days after her hospital admission, she suddenly passed away. It would be 2 months after her death that Connor was arrested, accused of administering a substance that is fatal in high doses. Shockingly, there is evidence that he Google searched Betty's weight and determined what dose would be fatal. It's alleged that his online searches also included queries about whether internet searches can be used in court. Connor has been charged with second-degree murder. group killed their friend and then drove him around with a hat and sunglasses on, pretending he was still alive. Joshua Rose was just 21 years old, living in Pennsylvania. On the 25th of August 2016, he was at a friend's house in Scranton. He was with 19-year-old Preston Layfield and his ex-girlfriend, 20-year-old Amanda Wader. The trio were all using the substance H. Unfortunately, as is very common with this substance, Joshua lost consciousness. Preston and Amanda panicked as they figured he may have OD'd. Amanda called her friend, 22-year-old Tyler, and asked if he could give them a lift to the hospital. Tyler said yes, and the three of them put Joshua in the car and started the drive. However, rather than actually getting their friend the urgent help he needed, they ended up driving straight past the hospital. For some unknown reason, they continued to drive north down Interstate I-81. Between there and the remote wooded area that they ended up, at some point they put a bag over Joshua's head. Horrifically, Preston then strangled him with a cable. Amanda later stated that she knew Joshua was still alive at this point as she saw him breathing. Once Joshua was deceased, they put a hat and sunglasses on him to make him look like he was still alive. They stopped for petrol before carrying on and eventually dumping Joshua's body in a remote wooded area. Luckily, CCTV images captured them driving Joshua around with the hat and sunglasses on. All three pleaded guilty to third-degree murder. Preston and Tyler both got 20 to 40 years. Amanda got 15 to 40 years. This is the case of the baby who was found murdered near Gulliver's World theme park in Cheshire. On March the 14th, 1998, a hideous discovery was made. A dog walker was strolling through the woods near Gulliver's World in Warrington, Cheshire, when they found a baby's body in a bin bag. A post-mortem was conducted and showed the child had been strangled and beaten round the head. The victim was just hours old when he tragically died. The parents of the baby were never found and his identity remained a mystery. Now, 25 years later, we may finally have answers. The child was eventually named Callum by officers and he was given a funeral in which 150 locals attended. Kind locals raised over £800 to go towards the funeral costs and he was buried in a little white coffin. His headstone states, "With love from the people of Warrington." In July this year, 2 people from Liverpool were arrested on suspicion of his murder and have since been released on bail. Police state that the investigation is still ongoing. The detective who led the investigation once described the case as one of the most disturbing of his career. In 1988, the mystery of a woman found dead in a bin plagued Georgia. We now finally have answers in this unsettling case. It was Valentine's Day 1988 and police received a report. A victim had been found deceased. She was wrapped in plastic and duct tape in a large nylon suitcase that had been placed in a bin. It was believed that the female had been reportedly dead for around 4 to 7 days and the cause of death was asphyxiation. However, no one knew who this woman was. Fingerprints and dental records were compared to other missing people in the country, but there was no matches. A forensic artist drew a sketch of the victim's possible appearance, which was released to the public, but the mystery remained. Now we finally know her identity. The mystery victim was 26-year-old Chong-un Kim of Hinesville. New genealogical technology finally led to her identification. In 1981, she had moved to Korea to the US. She has a sister who currently lives in New York. Now there is still the mystery of who on earth killed this woman and why. Police state that they will work relentlessly to bring justice and closure to her family. When I think of theme park rides likely to kill someone, I don't think about the miniature railway. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened at Gulliver's Land in Milton Keynes. Hugh Doe was 56 and from Newport Pagnell in Bucks. He was an engineer and he was working at Gulliver's Land on May the 10th, 2006. He had been doing some maintenance on the miniature railway train at the theme park, and after the work was completed, it's reported that he stood up after giving the driver the all clear to move the train on. Tragically, he was killed instantly when the train went into a tunnel. Hideously, it's reported that he suffered a huge amount of trauma to his skull and brain before being dragged through the 10-foot-long tunnel. When a health and safety spokeswoman was asked for comment, she stated that he had been decapitated. She stated, "There was probably 2.5 to 3 inches between the top of the carriage and the tunnel." The park was closed to members of the public the day after the incident as a mark of respect for the victim. There was an inquest into Hugh Doe's death. Eventually, it was announced that Hugh's death was labelled as misadventure. When police arrived at this bloody murder scene, they were on the hunt for a masked intruder. What they ended up uncovering, no one expected. Couple Erin Everett and Tony Minnick lived in Jerome, Pennsylvania. The pair had begun a whirlwind romance after Erin had come out to members of her family as a lesbian. Tori had also recently broke off her engagement with a man. Unfortunately, initially Erin's family was not accepting of her sexuality. Despite this, though, the pair were happy together. The relationship was moving quite quickly, and Erin proposed to Tori early on. To the outside world, things looked picture perfect. Erin's parents, despite their initial reservations, ended up agreeing to let Tori move into their home to be with Erin. However, things started to take a dark turn. The pair had started to get into bad arguments after moving in together. Now, despite Erin telling everyone how happy she was, Erin's mother actually got concerned that Tori was being physically abusive to Erin. Their fights started getting worse and worse, and Tori started spending time away from their home. That was until Erin found out some devastating news. Tori had apparently been seeing her ex-fiancé Cody behind Erin's back. Erin was enraged by this, and on the evening of March the 25th, 2011, things would change forever. While Tori was fast asleep, Erin took her dad's gun and shot Tori twice. She then attacked her with a hammer. After realising she was not able to dispose of Tori's body alone, she rang her mum. She claimed that a masked intruder had committed the murder and she just found Tori. Police were called and found the hideous scene. Erin seemed to be kind of trying to pin the attack on Tori's ex-fiancé Cody, but police saw right through her claims. After they grilled her in questioning, she eventually admitted to the crime. Despite her confession, she did plead not guilty and claimed she was abused by Tori. Eventually, she was found guilty and sentenced to life without parole. A man rang police to admit to hiding his dead son's body in a freezer, and when police arrived and couldn't find it, they just left. After 11 a.m. on the 29th of October, police got a disturbing phone call. This was about a deceased person found in Bradford Drive in Huntsville, Alabama. Police attended the property and found the decomposed body of 19-year-old Logan Michael Halstead in a freezer outside. But this isn't the first time that police had been to the house. The new owners had bought the property in September and were in the process of cleaning it out to move in when they made the grim discovery. Now, the body is believed to have been in that freezer since August. It was at this point that police questioned the previous occupants, couple Michael and Karen Halstead. The victim is thought to be their son, and the pair have been charged with 1 count of abuse of a corpse. Disturbingly, the pair actually have 2 other children, twin boys, who are being looked after by professionals. Logan was reportedly disabled before his tragic death. An autopsy is currently being carried out, and dependent on the results, the parents may then be charged with murder. When questioned, Michael actually made a shocking revelation. Firstly, Michael stated that his wife Karen was unaware of this crime. It's alleged that Michael tried to hide Logan's body and wrapped him in blankets, plastic, and covered him in cardboard. The second shocking revelation is the fact that Michael stated he even called the police on the 11th of October and told them that he had hidden Logan's body. However, it seemed that he did such a good job of hiding the body that police were unable to find it. It's reported by multiple sources that police turned up, looked for it, but after being unsuccessful, they simply left. After pleading guilty to torturing their foster son, this couple's lawyer stated that it was simply due to the fact that they didn't have much parenting experience. Nicholas and Mackenzie Spencer are a married couple in their 30s from South Carolina. They had been living in Uganda after moving there in 2017 on humanitarian work. However, it turns out the couple have a disgustingly dark side. 5 years ago, they fostered 3 children from a Christian ministry. Sickeningly, they were arrested in December 2022 on charges of aggravated torture. According to police statements, the couple allegedly kept their 10-year-old foster son barefoot and naked throughout the day. They're accused of forcing the child to squat in an awkward position and making him sleep on a wooden plank without a mattress or bedding. They're believed to have had a camera monitoring him constantly and apparently kept him confined to a small room. This allegedly went on for 2 years. Shockingly, after the couple pleaded guilty, they were ordered to pay a $28,000 fine. The pair were also later charged with aggravated child trafficking and have been out on bail since pleading guilty. They spent a short time in prison, and it's reported that if they are able to pay this fine, they may not have to spend a single day longer. The couple's lawyer claimed that they weren't able to look after the child properly due to having no parenting experience. The poor child has been placed into a children's home. An arrest was made on Halloween this year relating to a Halloween cold case murder from 4 decades ago. In the early hours of Halloween 1982, Clifford Smith was murdered. The 24-year-old man was shot in the head and his body was dumped by the White River in Indiana. His worried wife had reported him missing to police, and there was no news for an agonizing month. It was then that animal trappers came across the victim's body on the 1st of December. However, frustratingly, the case went cold and Clifford's family went without any closure or justice for over 4 decades. Thankfully, this Halloween, 41 years exactly since the tragic killing, a man was arrested. 61-year-old Ronald Anderson was detained by police, and police state he will be held in jail until he appears in court. Police believe that Ronald was actually at the same gathering as Clifford on the night in question. They apparently both left together in the early hours of the morning. Police believe that Ronald took a shotgun with him from the house when he left. It's believed that he dumped the weapon back at the house and also went back to the victim's body to hide evidence a couple of days later. Interestingly, although usually with these cold cases, it actually wasn't new technology that has helped crack this case. Investigators have stated that it was simply a case of re-interviewing and also re-examining old evidence that they had. This true crime case is a horrific warning to be very careful with who you're friends with at school. Christine Paulila from Long Island was diagnosed with alopecia and poor vision from an early age. Upsettingly, she was bullied at school regularly due to her appearance. She would wear thick glasses to help with her sight and wigs due to her hair loss. Children would be very cruel to her and run up behind her and snatch her wig off, leaving her humiliated. She would desperately try to do her makeup to look as nice as possible and would draw on her eyebrows to try and fit in. Then while attending high school in Euston, she made friends with some of the popular girls. These girls were Rachel Colorutis and Tiffany Rowell. The pair really supported Christine and helped her with improving her makeup skills to look even better. She was eventually named the school's Miss Irresistible in 2000. She was a far cry from the shy and insecure child she once was. Due to her newfound confidence, she started to date and she got a boyfriend. 17-year-old Christine started dating 21-year-old Christopher Snyder. Unfortunately, he was a known criminal and used to do substances, so understandably, Christine's friends and parents disapproved. Christine would end up using substances too while they were dating. The couple started having some quite shocking arguments, and one of them even resulted in Christine spending the night on Christopher's parents' front garden and threatening to kill them all. On the 18th of July 2003, the couple visited Tiffany's house. They had a sinister plan. Now, Tiffany lived in Clear Lake City and she was hanging out with her own boyfriend and his cousin Aldebert and Rachel. The friends' nice evening would begin to take a very dark turn. Christine and her boyfriend had planned to go to Tiffany's house to steal substances and then leave. Upon arrival, though, the pair started to have another argument. Shockingly, the two of them began shooting. It's reported that they fired at least 40 times. The 4 innocent victims all received multiple gunshot wounds and 3 were deceased. At this point, though, Rachel was alive. The poor girl mustered up some strength amongst all of the chaos and crawled through a puddle of her own blood. She was desperately trying to reach a phone to call for help. However, Christine spotted her and started beating her over the head with a weapon. As Rachel was dying, she called out, "Why?" Sadly, one of the victims, Aldebert, had moved to the area to escape violence in his hometown. The couple fled the scene, leaving very little evidence behind. They fled to a Walgreens where Christine was due to start work, and she clocked in like nothing ever happened. This was just over an hour after the horrific murders. The only evidence the police actually had to go off were the descriptions of the suspects from eyewitnesses in the neighbourhood who saw the pair leave. Police actually initially thought that the deaths were just substance related, but 3 years in, the truth was revealed. During this time, the murderous pair had broken up. Christopher ended up going to prison for stealing a car, and Christine went to rehab in Texas. While there, she met a man called Stanley Rott, and the pair would end up getting married. Now, this was in March 2005, and Stanley had no idea of the horrors that had gone on in 2003. It wasn't until Christine saw a news report on the TV with a police sketch of her that she decided to come clean to her husband. Instead of leaving her, he actually helped her evade police. The pair went into hiding for an entire year in San Antonio until police received an anonymous tip. Christine was arrested at the motel and Stanley told police what he knew. Christine tried to blame her ex and the pair were charged with murder. Frustratingly though, before police could get their hands on Christopher, in 2006 he took his own life. Christine was found guilty and was sentenced to life. She's never admitted to a motive for the crimes, but psychiatrists have speculated that it may have been due to jealousy. After this woman told her friends that her ex was threatening to kill her, she vanished. Ebony Duncan from Missouri vanished in September. The 44-year-old woman was reported missing on the 7th of September after failing to show up at work. CCTV footage captured her the day prior to her going missing, leaving in a silver car which pulled up behind her after she finished work at around 6:11 p.m. Worryingly, she had told one of her co-workers that her ex-boyfriend was threatening to kill her, and the man in question is identified as Charles Smith Howell. Charles is actually already in police custody after being arrested on charges of illegally possessing ammunition. He's due in court on the 8th of January. He does actually already have a criminal history with convictions relating to substances, robbery and weapons. The car that picked Ebony up on the day in question is believed to be owned by Charles's girlfriend. Shockingly, it's been reported that police may have found Ebony's body. This came after police dogs located a deceased person in the woods of Kansas City. Police are requesting help from the public in locating the person of interest, Kiera Ransberg, as they require her for questioning. Huge trigger warning for this video, which is one of the most disgusting UK news cases I think I've ever seen. Mark Whalley is a 71-year-old man from Manchester. At the end of last month, news broke of the horrors he had planned. The National Crime Agency had found Mark used websites to discuss his interest in children under 12 with others. Disgustingly, he'd shared explicit images with others and shared his own plans and wishes to perform hideous acts himself. Now, it was actually a tip-off from Norway that helped to catch this criminal in the act who was planning a hideous attack. Mark had spoken to someone online who claimed to have access to a 12-week-old baby. They agreed for Mark to use this child for his sickening plan. Mark arranged to meet this person at a hotel in Manchester city centre. He entered the hotel and attempted to board the lift. Officers intercepted him as he did so and detained him. He was arrested on suspicion of child abuse offences. Now, originally he had tried to claim that the officers were mistaken and he was simply meeting someone for an affair. He would eventually admit to his hideous crimes and pleaded guilty to making and distributing child P. He also confessed to arranging a child S offence and possession of extreme images. Mark's devices had already been found to have child P on them back in 2021. He's been sentenced to just 80 months in prison. You'll never guess what unlikely job this man got after his wife cut off his private parts. John Bobbitt from New York was taken off his mum at an early age. She'd struggled with mental health issues, so he was placed in the care of his aunt and uncle. He met Loretta Gallo in 1988 and the pair had a whirlwind romance. Despite the fact that she could barely speak the same language as John, they married in 1989, aged just 20 and 22. He later stated that he felt pressured to marry her as her visa was about to expire. In 91, the pair were having money issues. John was discharged from the Marines and was struggling to get work. Lorena was earning the majority of the household income, and there were reports that John couldn't handle this. He allegedly started abusing her and R-ing her. When she became pregnant, he allegedly made her get rid of the pregnancy. Now, John denies these claims and he states that Lorena was the abuser. He claims that she could be controlling and aggressive. 4 years after they had got married, John asked for a divorce and Lorena was really against this. It was the evening of the 22nd of June 1993 and John had gone out drinking with friends. When he returns, Lorena claims that he R-ed her. It was now the early hours of the morning and Lorena went to the kitchen after the attack to get some water. It was then that she saw a knife, grabbed it and used it to amputate John's private parts. Obviously, John had to be rushed into hospital and while a friend took him, Lorena fled with his pee in her hand. She ended up throwing it into a field and turning up at her manager's house. She confessed to her what had happened and the manager called the police. Now, after being grilled by authorities, Lorena told police where they could find John's severed body part. They actually were able to find it in time and put it in ice. Miraculously, surgeons were able to stitch it back onto John after a 9.5-hour operation. John and Lorena were both arrested for their apparent crimes. Now, the incident was huge and many big TV shows covered it. In court, John was acquitted of the SA in '93. Lorena was found not guilty of malicious wounding due to temporary insanity. She was held in a mental health facility for 45 days. The couple's divorce was finalised and John ended up with a rather unlikely career in adult entertainment. John also then ended up being accused and found guilty of a number of violent crimes against women. He spent time in jail for the domestic battery of his then fiancée Christina and later had a second domestic battery charge. He was later convicted of harassing an ex-girlfriend. Then in the early 2000s he faced charges of assaulting his then wife Joanna. Bizarrely, in 2009 John actually admitted to still having feelings for Lorena and as recently as 2019 he was writing her love letters. After police ignored this woman's cries for help about her abusive ex, he killed her. This case will make your blood boil. Nityadavi Ramroop was a 35-year-old mother of 3 from Texas when she was tragically killed last week. She'd been married to Bisham Ramroop for nearly 18 years when they split. During their relationship, he abused his wife. He would threaten her and push her in front of their children. Now, the children were understandably afraid of him. After she was initially really worried to divorce him due to what he could potentially do, she eventually worked up the courage to leave. However, she was right to be afraid. Nityadavi was followed by her ex several times after they broke up. She contacted police numerous times about him stalking and abusing her. Frustratingly, they never filed any charges. He reportedly once followed her to one of her friends' houses and she rang the police, and when the police showed up they told her they couldn't do anything because no crime had been committed. His behaviour was escalating and on one occasion he followed her to a bar and dragged her out. One of her friend's husbands had to step in and save her from him. He then went on to vandalise her car and this was captured on video and the police did nothing. Shockingly, his family were in on this too. They were contacting her workplace and even showing up and confronting her. The mother of 3 remained focused though. She really wanted to do what was best for her children and make a better life for them all. This would all end in a horrific crime. Just days before their divorce was finalised, on Tuesday last week, he shot her. He had arrived to the house that she'd been trying to keep secret from him. He shot her outside of the property while her sister and children were inside the home. He tried to force his way into the house and confronted her 25-year-old sister and tried to attack her with a piece of glass. He succeeded in stabbing her and luckily she survived the horrible attack. Bisham was found later deceased from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. This is the horrific case of Lee Rigby that stunned the UK. It was initially just a normal afternoon on the 22nd of May 2013. A British Army soldier, Lee Rigby, was off duty in London. He was walking down Wellington Street when a horrific tragedy would occur. At this point, Lee was just 25 years old. He was a well-respected drummer and machine gunner from Manchester and was engaged with a 2-year-old son. He was an avid supporter of the charity Help for Heroes. On the day in question, 2 men, Michael Adebalejo and Michael Adebawole, were in the area. Just before 2:20 p.m, they saw Lee crossing the road. The 2 men launched a brutal attack. They drove a Vauxhall Tigra at him, which knocked him over to the floor. They then exited the car and launched into an attack with knives and a cleaver. A member of the bus noticed an incident and jumped off, expecting to just give first aid. The person thought that it was just a road traffic collision. She got a horrific shock when she realised that Lee was actually deceased. While Lee was on the ground, she started engaging the attacker in a conversation and asking what on earth has happened. He started claiming responsibility for the attack and claimed that it was due to Lee being responsible for deaths of certain religious groups. A phone captured a video of one of the men stating his extremist propaganda to justify the attack. The attackers stayed at the scene while police were called. Both armed and unarmed police were deployed to the area, and as they arrived, the men charged at them. Armed police fired 8 times, wounding the men, and one of the men had his thumb shot off. Afterwards, it was revealed that both men were known to British security services. The day after the murder, 8 people were arrested in connection and 6 were freed on bail and 2 released without charge. Both killers were found guilty of murder, the eldest getting a whole life term without parole and the youngest receiving just 45 years. The Lee Rigby Foundation was set up to support bereaved military families. Recently, Lee's son received a Pride of Britain award for his fundraising work for Scotty's Little Soldiers in memory of his dad. Did this child help to solve her own murder? Nicole Koppler was 14 years old from Lima in Ohio. On the 19th of May 1999, she vanished. Her family was understandably very concerned, and this was only amplified when they made a sickening discovery. Up until her disappearance, it was revealed that she'd been spending time with a man called Glenn Fryer who had a criminal record. Disturbingly, this was for SAing a young girl. It would be an agonising wait for Nicole's family before there were any developments in this case. And horrifically, it would take a 12-year-old girl to be attacked before any light was shone. In 2002, Glenn was charged with R-ing the girl in question. And police ended up searching his house and made a worrying discovery. They found Nicole's ID and her diary. The diary had a very unsettling entry in it, dated May the 24th, 1999. This was just 5 days after she vanished. She'd written in the diary entry that she had run away from home intentionally but did want to go back. She wrote in her diary that the people that she was staying with would not let her leave. Unsurprisingly, Glenn became the prime suspect in her disappearance. Police were actually working on a theory that maybe Glenn had taken her with the intent of human trafficking, and then potentially she could have resisted and he may have killed her by accident. He also may have killed her intentionally if she had resisted, as it was just too risky. Now, tragically, Glenn was never convicted of anything in relation to Nicole's case because just days after pleading no contest for the 2002 R, he took his own life in his police cell. It then wasn't until 2012 that Nicole's family could finally have some sort of closure in this case. Glenn's house taxes went unpaid and the house was abandoned for years. The council decided that it was unsightly and they needed to demolish the house, and as they did so, a discovery was made. The demolition team found human bones that were found to be Nicole's. Her family was finally able to put her to rest. This man has been sentenced to 100 years in prison after doing the unthinkable to his daughter. Tony Valles is a 66-year-old from Helena. On the 10th of July 2022, he was at home with his partner Heather. Tony's 8-year-old daughter Ariana and his 18-year-old son were also at the house at the time. Suddenly, 2 women entered the property who he believed were evicting him. He flew into a violent rage and grabbed a weapon from his bedroom. At this point, he began shooting. He shot Heather and she fell to the floor, and then he shot at his son. His 8-year-old daughter tried to escape and run from the terror, but she was hit with gunfire. She was on the stairs when she was hit by a bullet and she fell back. She tragically died after being rushed to hospital. After his daughter's death, Tony stated, "I'm sorry for all this. I can't undo what I've done. The pain and the misery will last a lifetime and I'm sorry for all that." Tony was sentenced to serve 100 years in prison. This woman admitted to committing attempted murder to someone she didn't realise was a police officer. Peggy Valentine is a 44-year-old woman from Louisiana. On May the 4th, 2022, she entered the home of her fiancé's girlfriend's mum. She forced entry into the home armed with a box cutter in the early hours of the morning. It was then that she attacked the mother in her sleep. It's reported that Peggy's fiancé had been seeing another woman who recently had given birth to his child. Peggy reportedly stated that she went to the house simply to try and catch her fiancé in the lie, and things escalated. After the attack, she was feeling obviously very guilty and went to her pastor to confess. He advised that she handed herself in. She hadn't actually realised that he was also a major with the parish sheriff's office. She claimed that she went into the house without the intention to hurt anybody, but the situation got out of hand. Peggy's attorney argued that the conversation between the pastor and Peggy shouldn't have been admissible in court. However, the judge disagreed. Peggy is due to be sentenced in February next year. Imagine coming home one night to find scattered human body parts on your bathroom floor. Justin Barnett was only 23 years old when he vanished in 1995. It was June the 3rd and he was living in Birmingham, Alabama with his ex-girlfriend Sheila Horton. Now Justin had plans to go to a party that night and was due to meet a new girl there. That evening he borrowed his ex Sheila's car and went out to meet some friends for a drink beforehand. After enjoying the drinks, he told his friends that he was off to meet a girl and that he would be back at some point later. However, he never returned. His friends tried to get in contact with him and see where he was, but they couldn't reach him, so they just presumed maybe he's gone home to sleep. When Justin's ex Sheila got back to the house as well at 2 a.m, she noticed he wasn't home. She was a little bit concerned but figured maybe he would be back in the morning. The day after, when he failed to come back home, he was reported missing to police. It would be days later that a worrying discovery was made. Sheila's car was found in Lakeview with no sign of Justin. However, this was particularly suspicious because police had actually searched the area where they did find the car previously and the car hadn't been there. It was an agonising 2 decades before any news. It was actually January 2015 and a man with a guilty conscience showed up to a police station to make a statement. He was called Jonathan Abney and he was only 18 years old at the time of Justin's disappearance. He had some news that would stun investigators. He'd been living with his older sister Trisha and her boyfriend Jeff Martin at the time of Justin's vanishing. On the night of the 3rd of June 1995, he came home to a scene like that out of a horror film. Dismembered body parts lay all over the bathroom floor and the limbs belonged to Justin. Jonathan had actually met Justin just once previously when he was buying substances. Jonathan told officers that his sister had convinced him to go out that night so she and Justin could have some alone time. However, she had very sinister plans for the evening. Her and her partner planned to rob Justin, but this would go horribly wrong. They ended up stabbing Justin to death and Jonathan had helped the pair get rid of Justin's body. Jonathan then took Sheila's car to the place where police had found it. Now Trisha was arrested and Jeff actually ended his own life shortly after. Trisha was given life in prison without parole and Jonathan was actually given immunity for his confession and cooperation.